Welcome to this episode of Chopping Wealth. This is our monthly webinar where we chop it up with an expert in behavior, advice, and other interesting things. I am thrilled to welcome my friend, Denise Shull, to speak with us today about the psychology of risk, emotions, and many other things. And because Neil is obsessed with, my partner Neil Page is obsessed with all things psychology of risk, he insisted that he come along for the ride this month. So I'm happy. I'm happy he's here. So Denise, welcome.
Brian and Neil, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes. All right, so let's dive right in. So I've known you for, I was thinking maybe 10 years now, and tracking your work. And if there's a core to what you put out into the world, it's that our emotions are our friends, and we're here in the context of financial risk taking, where often we'll say, hey, put your emotions off to the side, and just be rational and cold and calculating. And you have built a significant coaching practice. You've also written a ton on this that basically says, nope, flip it on its head. We're going 180 degrees in the opposite direction. Decisions require emotion. Tons of questions and follow-ups in my mind, but maybe you could just set the table on the perspective and career you've built on this unbelievably important insight.
Yeah, so, I got this master's degree in what's now called neuropsychoanalysis, this was in the 90s, and it was still kind of cognition and emotion. And then I ditched the PhD and became a trader, and it was take the emotion out of it, control the emotion, just like you said. And somewhat randomly, a little institute wanted to publish my master's thesis in 2003. And I'm like, you guys are psychoanalysts. You're going to look idiotic. It's 10-year-old neuroscience. We need to update it. Well, in the interim, Antonio Damasio had done the research and actually written a popular book called Descartes' Error. And, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And Damasio told us back in 95 or 8 or 7 or somewhere in there that it's wrong. I feel, therefore I am. And I was like, darn, this changes everything. And I just started talking about it, and people wanted to hear more about it, honestly. And I was always interested in like how I felt. And I was always skeptical of people telling me that, I could feel differently by standing up straight and smiling, or this or that, cognitive / physical trick. But it was really the trading. Like, it was my own experience trading, running trading desks, and all of the, plan the trade the plan, like take the emotion out of it, be rational. And I was like, wait a minute. If you could actually take the emotion out of it, you couldn't make a single decision. And that's Damasio. I'm just the conduit. I didn't say that. Damasio said it.
Yeah, but go there. Like, so forget markets and trading desks and options markets and all that for a second. Let's revisit the or let's visit like the core insight that we can't even make a decision on anything, like whether or not you want pepperoni on your pizza, like, without emotion. So can you like frame that, because it's really important.
If you think about it, whenever you make a choice, pepperoni or no pepperoni, or some of the experiments that he talked about were which day to go to the doctor or which shirt to wear. Like, when we make these decisions, we have either a sense of, a physical sense of like the appropriate, the right thing, or the thing that will like and bring us pleasure, like pepperoni versus sausage. So, which, by the way, you're predicting a future emotion. But like, you have this feeling about how that decision will play out. That feeling, if you don't have that feeling, which falls under the category of emotion, you don't know which thing to pick. Every single thing you do, you have a feeling about how it's going to work, like why it's the right thing. And absent that, you can't decide.
And haven't there been, I mean, I vaguely recall there being studies where through some accident where there was brain damage, like people who no longer were able to feel certain emotions were then sort of effectively paralyzed in terms of being able to make decisions in that domain.
Yeah, they did this with these original experiments in the 90s were done with people who are brain damaged in certain ways that they really don't have emotion. And they can't decide anything. I mean, anything. Like with a doctor's appointment, they'll go Tuesday, blah, 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 no Wednesday, blah, 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 Tuesday, no, blah, 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 Wednesday, blah, blah. They'll go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Why? Because they have no sense of which day, works out better for that. With a shirt, they'll go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth because they don't know, well, that shirt's casual or that shirt's more formal and that's more appropriate for this thing. They have no sense of what is right or appropriate. Now, people can not think of that as emotion, but it's this physical feeling that we have that gives us information. And absent that, we don't know what to do.
Sorry, Denise, so how do you, it's a really great statement that absent that we don't know what to do, but the reality is that as we go through life, we still have to act. We still have to make a decision based on the inputs that are coming into our brain. So if I'm taking in a sensation that's alien to me, that generates an emotion, and I still need to make a decision, how do I square that off if the input is new, but I still need to make a decision? I can't just go, I've never experienced this before, therefore I'm not doing anything. We still have to go through life. We still have to make choices and decisions. So how do you square off? How do people deal with that situation when, it's a new input and the emotion that they're feeling is new and novel to them?
Yeah, well, what we've learned since I wrote that paper is the brain is absolutely a prediction machine. And it's just doing pattern matching all the time. How is this like that? And how did that turn out? And should I repeat my decision or do something different? So, yes, we encounter things that are new, but our brain is finding something in our past that it matches in order to be able to put context to it in some sort of spectrum of confidence in the right thing to do. It's why, by the way, our perception is skewed much of the time, because we are taking our past experience and to just dive right into the deep end of the pool. That past experience largely includes our self-image, like where we fit, how we expect to be treated, what are we good at, not good at. And then we have some feeling about the decision or the behavior we're going to enact in a given situation. And our decision is influenced by anything that seems similar, but very much by who do we think we are and how we fit in a situation.
Tell me if this question doesn't make sense, but I appreciate the point about pattern seeking, pattern recognition. We get that next data point, that next input, and we sort of automatically think, okay, well, where does it fit into some mental map I have going on? Can we think of that in skills-based terms? Are people more or less skillful in pattern matching, and have you seen that in your coaching practice?
Well, everyone's really, really, really good at pattern matching because they couldn't get through any day without it, but their patterns can be distorted, based on whatever their past experiences are. So the actual process of matching patterns, I mean, we match a pattern and we actually have an expectation of a future emotion. So confidence is, whatever the thing you feel confident about. You're predicting that you're going to feel fine in the future. You know, as you go through the situation or the challenge, it's going to turn out okay, and you're going to feel good, not bad, or, you know, at least okay, not bad. What Brian Newton of Stanford says, he calls it anticipatory affect. Like, if you don't have it, you die. So we're all doing it. It's just most of us have, you know, as part of the human condition. And, you know, in the human condition, there's a certain amount of, am I good enough in everyone, at least in some circumstance. You know, we all have places where we pattern match ourselves into something that's not accurate in the moment. You know, but like if someone looks at it from the outside, they'll say, no, you know, Brian's skill in that area is just fine, but you might feel like it's not, right? But
no, I get it. And, you know, on this, I think really foundational point that emotions are information. I guess say more about that. Like, what is the information that we are deriving from the different emotions? And if you think of, you know, psychologists have this emotion wheel where there's sort of 6 core emotions: sadness, happiness, anger, and then it kind of fans out to dozens and scores of different descriptions of emotions. Like, how does it work that all of those emotions that we may or may not feel, and we're going to get to the sensation part of this later, but how do they become information?
I think the physical experience of it, you know, fear, frustration, disappointment are the 3 I always use off the top of my head. But you know, you have this feeling. It's meant to get your attention and turn your cognition, your intellect, to the, like, what's causing this feeling. So now, because we have historical patterns of distorted feelings, then the trick becomes to know which feeling is really about the here and now and which is just our expectation. But at its core, like particularly the unpleasant feelings are like trying to say, pay attention, you know, like, understand this. If it's frustration, let's say, it's like, okay, what is not going right here? What do I need to do differently? Like, what needs to get fixed to make this a less frustrating situation? I mean, and that's true for really that range of, like, irritated, annoyed, frustrated, angry, you know, enraged. If it's disappointment, like something didn't go right, well, why didn't it go right? Like, you know, understand what happened so that you hopefully can learn something and prevent the disappointment the next time. But because we're all taught that, you know, emotions are whatever, you know, old and outdated, or, you know, I don't know what, but what we learn is that we're supposed to set them aside. And what generally happens, and this has been shown in experiment after experiment after experiment, if you try to suppress your feelings, they actually get stronger. Why? Because if they're trying to give you information in their pure form, you know, your actually psyche, your unconscious is actually trying to help you. And you're going, shut up. And it's going, no, no, no. And you're going, no, no. And it's going, no. So then what happens? Some people act it out, right? Then the energy of the emotion gets so big that you can't help but do the thing in the emotion. Whether that's act fearful, you know, act enraged. But if way earlier in the cycle, you just understood that feeling is like, okay, it's trying to tell me something. What am I really afraid of? You know, what am I really disappointed about? What am I really angry about? And you, like, just sat with it and felt it and analyzed it. What happens is first of all, you get a way larger spectrum of choices. You understand the situation better. And you're less compelled to act it out simply by feeling it. People are afraid if they feel something, like they're gonna, like, you know, I don't know, evaporate into the ether. Like, and you find out if you just let yourself feel it, like nothing actually happens.
Do you think that a lot of that suppression of emotion, you know, leave it alone, ignore it, it'll go away, is cultural, or is it taught, or is that something that we just, from a genetics perspective, almost from a nature perspective, almost, we're just, that's who we are?
Well, I think it's both, like anything, right? It used to be like, are we who we are from genetics, or are we who we are from how we were raised? And even when I went to graduate school in 1993, it was actually no longer an issue, in science. Like, it's 50-50. It's half nature, it's half nurture, meaning it's half genetics and half your environment. So you can't really, pull it apart. But like, I was on the ski lift earlier today, I admit, and some little kid was saying to his dad that he was scared to go down such and such. And the dad said, just stop whining. Well, I don't know what that kid's confidence level was in going down the slope they were talking about, but, he was definitely taught there, well, I shouldn't say I'm afraid, like, now maybe he's afraid for a good reason, I don't know, but it's, well, first of all, men are certainly taught not to like express their emotions. Never mind sports, like it's the whole like way that men are allowed to express. But generally, if you're a little boy growing up, you're definitely not supposed to express your emotions, generally speaking, more so than if you're a little girl. But then it's, it's sort of pervasive for everyone, as teenagers and young adults, and be professional. But it also can be a defense mechanism, meaning whether you're taught it or not, you're afraid of what happens if you feel it. So you work to not feel it.
And that translates very much into the world that we all live in, the world of finance. I think I've worked with financial advisors across the world for a long time. And one of the things that I constantly hear back from them is the conversations with clients is that, especially men, is they daren't tell the advisors that they are a little bit fearful of investing money in the market. So just in case they lose their money, and they go through this process of risk profiling, and they get given a label, you're medium to high risk, and then they live out that label and the instructions that come with that label. And I think you're right. I think there's a problem in us not being able to accept and express how we're feeling, given that they are the brain's way of telling us there's something that you need to be aware of here.
I mean, there is all kinds of research around professional portfolio managers who can put all of their feelings into words, particularly their negative feelings. They make more money than those who can't. They last longer in the markets. It actually starts with, there's research around traders in London, those who could feel their heart rate lasted longer in the markets and made more money. Why? Because feeling your basic physical, processes is a foundation for knowing then what you feel in something that's more emotional or more information filled beyond your physiology. So, I mean, it's literally the exact opposite. People who make financial risk decisions can make better decisions over time if they know they're afraid, they're frustrated, they're disappointed, they're enraged. I mean, I think it's because if you know it, if you know it, you can understand it. But even if you don't understand, let's just say you know it and you can't completely target where it's coming from or why you feel this way, you still reduce the chances that you act out the feeling. Like just by knowing it and by feeling it and labeling it. So you don't get out of the position too soon, or you don't not get in the position because you're worried, because you can kind of hold the feeling right here, even if you don't completely understand why you have it.
Sort of assumed in here, it seemed a little implicit that, so the emotions give you information, you listen to, you respect, you name the fear that you feel. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be feeling fear. Yeah, you are fearful. And so the little boy on the ski lift, I don't know if he's going down a bunny hill or a double black, but like those are different, those are different environments. So is it, I kind of feel like it's being implied that the emotions are giving you a window into an intuition, which is often correct, or is that a misreading? Is it just, hey, I am fearful and for some reason, but maybe this was a bunny hill and not a double black, and I misread the situation?
Well, I mean, you bring up a huge point, because we all do have our patterns of emotions, which are expectations, which are distorted. But the thing is, if you take on the task of just knowing what you're feeling and why, you get to know that pattern. So when you feel it, you can actually discount it as information relative to the situation at hand. Like I have a client, professional hedge fund manager, but was raised on a farm in Virginia when his grandfather was always critical. It didn't matter what he did, mow the grass, stack the wood, whatever, shovel the snow, whatever. It was always not quite right. And it is amazing. This guy is really, really, really good. But there is, in every single conversation I have with him, including this morning, there is a, but maybe it's just not quite right. So he kind of now knows. I just say, well, you're going to have like how am I going to get criticized here? So I just kind of like, let's just discount that. And this morning he like said, yeah, but, and then it was another version of just not right. But if you get to know your patterns, it becomes easier to know that thing that's just about you and not about the decision, because that's really one of the easy ways to market. Is this feeling about what's going to happen to me, or is it about the thing I'm trying to make a decision about? Now they're merged and the brain's trying to keep you safe. But if you at least ask the question, is this feeling I have like a worry about me and my ego and my success and my safety, or is it actually some intuition about the factors of the decision that's out here that I'm trying to make? And when you're aware of current and historical feelings, you are able to kind of hold them and then know your intuition, which is also a feeling. But I will say to people, ask yourself, what do you really think? It's like the only time I really focus on thoughts. Like, what do you want to happen? What are you afraid of? And what do you really think? And if you admit to what you want, admit to what you're afraid, and actually then will admit, because some people have trouble doing it, Yeah, I can say that, have trouble doing it. Like, what they really think is the thing, is their intuition, is their expertise assessment of whatever situation that is delivered to them in a feeling of what's right. But it also is one of those feelings that can feel like a thought.
I know you have you've written some pieces that kind of set out a continuum of feelings that go from mood to intuition to emotion to thought. On the intuition front, could you just define that for me? I spent the first 15 plus years of my career on the investment side of the business before moving to the advice side, and certainly talked with hundreds of portfolio managers who in some way, shape, or form claim to have sort of an intuition and over their positions or their portfolio, or certainly over the market. So I never really knew what they were talking about, and they couldn't articulate it. What do you mean? Do you have something very specific to define intuition in this context?
Well, I do think if it's true intuition, it is literally the feeling of expertise. So take any realm, a chef, a musician, like an expert chef, and we'll just take my husband because he likes to cook, but he's not an expert chef. You give those two people the same recipe. Somehow the expert chef is going to come out different. Why? He knew to mix it slightly differently, to have it at a different temperature, like these little things that the expert just knows are the way it should be done based on all their learning. Like those things those pieces of expertise in any realm are delivered to us in this feeling, this sense of what's right in a moment, which is, you only get that sense by, like, you know, spending a lot of time or something. So, but the problem is people don't know how to find that sense versus what they want to happen, right? Or what they're afraid might happen that they're trying to avoid. And that's the skill. Like, to decide that you're going to get to be more of an expert in your own feelings and what they mean, frankly, which what that means, you have to spend time with them, just like the chef spent all the time learning whatever he spent learning. Or, I mean, pick any field. It's true. Like, the expert senses things that the novice doesn't. Why? Because all the time they've spent, it allowed them to develop these senses about how the factors combine. So it's still, though, the trick is to, like, know what's that true sense. I mean, intuition is generally calm. I mean, one thing about the markets is it is a people game, right? And you're not trading the facts, you're trading how people are going to perceive things. And that's called theory of mind, and all human beings have theory of mind. And so, like, we actually all have, in a way, the innate skill to play in markets, but we don't know it. And we've been told we don't. And, like, we don't know how to put that sense of what other people are going to do, or what my hedge fund clients call positioning. It's positioning. But we're actually good at it, because we wouldn't drive or walk down the street or anything if we didn't have theory of mind. You know, we'd run into people and we'd get hit all the time.
Matt Hobson, who's a friend of Shaping Wealth, has chimed in and asked the question. I mean, he observed that, I think correctly, that advisors are told that they need to, financial advisors are told that they need to take the emotions out of investing, which is commonplace. Like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. And you know, you're kind of, you know, for those, especially those who are familiar with your body of work, you're kind of blowing people's minds. So we then rely on maybe emotions or intuition. How do we, and if I'm capturing Matt's question correctly, we have emotion and intuition as advisors. The clients have emotion and intuition. How do we sort through kind of who's right, whose emotions are more valid, like who's sort of taking the lead and driving these discussions? Maybe there should be a conversation between advisor and client on sort of emotional calibration. Are we thinking of this in the right way? Like, how I know your day-to-day is on the hedge fund manager, the trader types, but we're pivoting a little bit here to the world of advice. How would you give a, you know, sort of perspective on that advisor-client relationship or conversation?
Assuming the advisor has more experience in the market than the client, I mean, the default would be to assume the advisor has more actual expertise that then they can access via their intuition. But of course, the question is going to be, does the advisor know what they feel, you know, and why they feel it? Like, are they afraid of certain types of markets, or are they afraid of certain types of clients, which is going to then change how you'd interact with the client? But the trick would be to get clients to talk about how they feel so that you can help them sort it out. And here's the crazy trick, which sounds so counterintuitive, particularly to take the emotion out of it, and particularly to, like, you want clients to feel more comfortable and not be concerned about, you know, not be overly concerned about risk, is what's the worst that can happen, and make them play it out. Because people generally have these expectations of catastrophe. And it's actually that unconscious expectation of catastrophe that's preventing them from, for example, buying when there's blood in the streets. If they have, you know, a long-term plan and it doesn't matter because they're not going to touch this money for 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 years. Like, they don't know that they're really worried, like, if they buy today, that somehow they're going to, you know, and the market goes down for the next year, they're going to need that money next week. And all of a sudden they're going to lose their house. And, you know, I once talked to someone who I knew to be worth at least $600 million because it's been in the news that he had sold his company for $600 million. And like, it was a Friday afternoon in Chicago. He was taking vacation for the first time in like 13 years. And I was like, first time in 13 years, like, why? And so I didn't know to do this. What's the worst that can happen as much. This was like intuition on my part. Net, like he said, it would have all fallen apart if I'd taken vacation. Like, and I'm like, and I said, and I know this. So your son would have been a drug dealer and your daughter would have been a prostitute, right? Because yes, exactly. Like our brain is trying to keep us safe. So our brain is like keeping us conscious of risks and the worst possible risks. Like it just wants us to avoid those. But we don't know that's happening. And so we don't know we have these disaster predictions that are actually overwhelming anything in the moment. So what an advisor can do is actually help the client understand what they're feeling and why, not judge it, not take the emotion out of it, not don't feel that way. Like, but let's just look at this and let's understand what this feeling is really about. And is it really about the market or this market, or is it about something else? And let's find the information in there and then use the information that's about the investment decision as opposed to about something else.
This is a really interesting or part of the conversation, which is, you know, advisors working with humans to try and understand their emotions and use all of that to then allow them to make informed decisions. And I'm gonna, before I ask you a question, Denise, I'm just going to tell you a quick story, which I think leads into the question. I was working with an advisor about 2-3 years back who had sat with a client, a young woman, and he'd worked through her risk profile. He'd asked her, you know, the normal questions through a risk tolerance questionnaire, and had established that she was a medium risk investor, built an asset allocation to suit her needs, and, you know, bada bing, bada boom, thank you very much. Let's just get on with life. Market's volatile. A year later, she gets on the telephone to him and says, "This feels wrong. I need to de-risk my investment. In fact, what I need to do is I just want to put it all into cash." And he was like, "What are you talking about? We've been through a process. You know, you came out as medium risk. You know, at the time, that's what we discussed. That's how you would feel if markets were like this." And her response was, "I actually didn't know how I would feel until it happened." And it was a bit of a left field comment for him. He didn't know how to deal with that, because his view was, we have this process. I go through some questions with a client. I ask them to predict their emotional responses to markets falling and rising and all that type of stuff. I build an asset allocation based off the back of that. But here I am seeing a client's risk profile changing as markets move up and down. So real world situation that leads to this question. From your experience, do you see people's and people's in the broader sense, their risk profile change over time as they experience more and more market movements, whatever that may be? Because, and the reason I ask this question, it's a loaded question, by the way, is because there is academic research out there, albeit I believe to be biased, we can talk about that another day, that suggests that risk tolerance is a stable personality trait, that once we have it in our late teens, early 20s, it's set. I have a view on that, by the way, but I just wanted to ask you that question. Do you think people's risk tolerance, as they experience life and the world and market cycles, actually is adaptive?
Well, adaptive, in what sense do you mean adaptive?
Meaning they think that they are high risk, but actually they behave and have an emotional response of someone who is low risk, or vice versa.
I would assume that the average person's prediction about their risk tolerance is wrong. The average person, you know, not necessarily the professional hedge fund manager, you know, and I would assume the advisor is somewhere in the middle. But the average person who's whatever, you know, a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, you know, a physicist, who they want to tell their advisor they are at the beginning and who they may really be are probably, there's probably two different people. But plus you have the reality that the human brain is trying to keep you safe. And so like you think it's not going to bother you if your portfolio goes down by 35%, but your brain, unless you know how to handle that feeling, is going to be going, this is a big risk, this is a big risk, this is a big risk. Make sure you do something about this. It's setting off alarm bells. And so most people are going to listen to those alarm bells and at least try to do something about it.
And I think this is the challenge financial services faces generally, in that the way that we address a very human trait, risk, the way that we try to systemize the way that the human brain works is by asking people a series of kind of anodyne questions that actually never really get to the heart of who the human being is sitting opposite us. And the clients then leave out, the advisor's office thinking that, oh, they've done a thorough job, they understand me, but actually, and I say this time and time again, until you experience something, until your brain is taking in all of that data and is processing that data under the lens of, I need to keep this person safe, then actually trying to predict how you're going to react in 10, 5, 2 years time is a little bit of a fool's errand.
Well, I've always been skeptical of risk profiles, but and I would think like some retrospective would be better than their prediction of themselves. Like, how did they choose where to go to college, or what are the biggest risks they took, or like what situations are they most comfortable in, like things that they've actually done. But again, I'm going to go back to, like, if people can explore what they feel and why they feel that way, they generally get more capable of tolerating their fears, which means what? They're able to sit through things that feel like more risk than they wanted to. So we want to, calm them down with facts. And just to quote Jennifer Lerner of Harvard, who's done a lot of research on emotions and risk, saturating people with cognitive facts is not promising. Like, you don't change how someone feels by going, but, generally, right? I mean, they may go along with you, but they still feel afraid. Where if you lay out, okay, these are the fears, what time frame are those fears going to play out in? What are they really predicting? And sometimes that question alone, they can see the time frame of the fears is different from the time frame of the investment or their portfolio. And then they go, oh, well, I might be able to tolerate that differential. Like, I'm afraid that next week I'm going to have lost all my money. I've got this portfolio for the next 25 years. Like, you get people to get all their feelings out on the table and sort of sort which one's about which time frame does it apply to. And oftentimes they become what we call more rational.
So I'm curious to hear, because you've been coaching traders and investors for many years now, and you've worked with people all over the world, different markets. What are some of the main lessons in terms of what's worked, what's been effective for what have you found to be effective as a coach to helping people make better investment decisions? And as part of that, I'm curious about how you think about behavior change, because part of what you're doing is not just doing this sort of card sort for emotions. Hey, let's get it all on the table and figure out what's what. But you're also, as a coach, motivating people to change certain things that they do in one way or another. So I'm actually really curious about like what's worked, maybe what hasn't worked with different types of traders and investors over the years.
I really do help my clients decide what they're feeling and why and how it applies to the market decisions they're making. Like, it is really card sorting the feelings. And then what happens is they're able to act on that expertise, that sense of intuition. I so often say, just do what you know how to do. Because, I mean, and these people, manage large portfolios for big investment managers. They're not that much different than anybody else. They just so happen to go through a career path that got them in a place where, like, they understand global macroeconomics and how currency markets move. And so therefore they got a job as an analyst analyzing currencies, and they seem to do okay. And then they were given money to manage. They got a certain sort of training that got them these jobs, but they second guess themselves, short-term trade, they have portfolios they're supposed to hold for months or years, and they're almost day trading them, in certain kinds of markets. But I am constantly, sorting through what they feel so that they can hear their intuition and really tolerate their fear. How does that play out? It plays out that they can get into a position, out of a position, bigger in a position, smaller in a position, and tolerate the uncertainty of, well, no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone next week or the month after that or the year after that. And they are charged with making money within a year's time frame. So that's really when you know what you're feeling and why you're feeling it, your choice of behaviors, you get a wider choice. And because you're not compelled to act out the feeling that you don't even know you have. And it's not easy for people to do. I have clients that even are relatively good at it. Maybe they came good at it, or they've been working with me for a couple, 3 years. And still, in the midst of a volatile market, they'll be, agitated and unsure. And this year there's been a lot of just tolerating the fact that it's really, more uncertain than usual, which is, it's already the most uncertain game in the world. So we just made it more uncertain between this strange combination of inflation and recession and now bank failures and oh my gosh. It leads to behave the funny thing is, when you really understand what you're feeling, it leads to behavior change. You are able to do things you weren't able to do before.
So in this card sorting exercise, where you get traders and financial professionals to lay out, tell us what you're feeling. Two-pronged question, I guess. The first one is, what's the most dominant set of feelings that you see in amongst that cohort, if you like? And the second part is, do you ever come across people who actually really struggle to name their feelings? They have a feeling, they have an emotion, but actually it's really quite difficult to articulate exactly what that is outside of the realms of the normal fear, anxiety, whatever. So what are the most dominant emotions that you see, and do you find that people sometimes struggle to articulate exactly how they're feeling?
And I said this on CNBC a decade ago, or longer than that, so it got me into the billions mess, but fear of future regret. You are afraid of feeling bad in the future. If people learn to recognize when they're afraid of feeling bad in the future, and usually feeling bad, by the way, has some component of embarrassment. Particularly if you manage money for anyone, right? You have clients you manage money for, you have whatever, institutional clients you manage money for. If anybody's going to know the results of your market decisions, the fear of future embarrassment is crazy powerful. So if you just make that conscious, shine sunlight on that, your ability to tolerate more potential embarrassment goes up, because you actually realize it's not as big of a threat, or you're willing to take the risk given other things that you think and feel about a given opportunity. People have various levels of emotional awareness, to try to answer the other question, and various levels of denial. I saw someone said, Ross, I think it was denial. People definitely appreciate the impact of emotions, Ross. But people also don't want to know they feel things. I mean, most of my professional, portfolio manager clients, I mean, they know what I do. So if they call me up, they know they're going to be talking about how they feel, right? But I've had people who are tangential. Like I have a private equity client who hired me 3 years ago now. He doesn't really want to know how he feels. I went from working with him twice a week, now I work with him every other week. And I've even sort of tried to say, well, maybe I'm not really helping you that much. Oh, no, I want to work with you forever. I'm like, but you don't want to understand how you feel. But I guess he feels as if he does understand more how he feels than he did relatively, but it's a pretty infinitesimal amount of additional understanding. People are afraid. They're afraid to know. We have a client. So we recently released an e-learning product, and then we do monthly coaching, and we have a discussion forum with that group of people. And we got an email from one of the very, very smart guys in the class. And one of the homework assignments is, to write down all your feelings about a certain situation. And he wrote me, he goes, I'm okay with talking about it in class. But he said, I would rather pull out my own teeth than write it down on a piece of paper. I don't know. Pulling out your own teeth sounds really damn painful.
So we, Monique, she latched onto something I was thinking about too, the fear of future embarrassment. It is so true. And some of the folks here today know that, we work with Hal Hirschfield, who has pioneered some of the research on the future self. And it's really, to me, fascinating because you guys come from some different research traditions, do different things for a living, but just thinking about the future self and the regrets of that future self, and then how it plays back to where we're sitting right now and the decisions or non-decisions that leads to. There's no question. I'm just kind of marinating in this idea that just how powerful the fear of future regret really is. And it does kind of connect the dots back to your original or your number 2 point, which is that all we really are prediction engines. All we're really, this is Marty Seligman, Homo prospectus, anticipation is really all we do. When you buy into the reality of that, this all becomes whole. And I think, for folks on the call who are, not traders, but financial advisors, they themselves thinking about their own financial well-being, but really, driving toward helping others, this fear of future regret is going to land, because there's no doubt that I bet you it's rarely brought up explicitly, but it sits underneath so many advisor-client relationships.
And it's crazy powerful because we're always predicting a future emotional state. So, and no one likes to feel regret. Like, what's the purpose of regret? Like to make you not do it again, right? Like it feels really, really crummy. Like the idea is when you regret something, like then next time you remember, like, I don't want to do that again, right? Whatever it was. And if anyone knows about it, like the prospect that other people know about it and it means something to sort of who you are in your world is even worse. I had a professional portfolio manager. I've only been working with him 6 months, but by the way, most of them call me up and want help with their intuition. Really, that's what they say. I want to trust my intuition more. And I know, like, you work in that realm and help me sort it out. But anyway, so he's definitely falls in that category. And it came up that at his previous fund and in his current fund, he would leave little positions on his book that, like, the thesis had changed. They weren't really working, but he just couldn't, like, cut them. Then he tried basically everything. So we did a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, the what's the worst that can happen, And he'd say, well, like people will answer. It's hard, I'm not coming up with, and I'll just say, well, what happens then? Well, my wife will know and she'll be mad at me. Well, what happens if she's mad at me? Like she'll make me sleep on the couch. Well, what happens if you sleep on the couch? Like, like I just ask the next question. Well, anyway, in doing that with this person, he said, the brokers will think I'm dumb. This is a professional portfolio manager. First of all, the brokers he's working with, like, they just want him to trade with them. They don't really care. They probably didn't even notice that the position he's closing, he lost money in. You know what I mean? They've done 1,000 trades since he opened. But literally in this case, as soon as he realized that was it, he started closing the positions while we were still on the phone. Because it was like, well, wait a minute, that's ridiculous. Who cares what they think? But until he externalized it, it was literally controlling him.
So we're coming up toward the top of the hour. And so first of all, a bunch of people in the chat, if you have any questions or thoughts, please share them. Before we wrap up, and we'll go toward the top of the hour, Denise, tell us how people can find out more about you and your team and what y'all do at ReThink.
Yeah, so we have one of those website things. It's called the rethinkgroup.net. .com is like an HR firm, and there's another one that's a Sunday school organization. There's a lot of rethink groups, yeah. But it's the rethinkgroup.net. I'm also on Twitter as Denise, my middle initial K, Shull. I've got a team, a couple of former client professional traders and portfolio managers. One in hedge funds for 25 years was my client. Decided he wanted to be a coach, partially because he promised his brother, who died early, that he would coach. And then another was a floor trader on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange for 18 years, as well as a Illinois runner-up amateur golf champion. In other words, he's a really good golfer. But they're both former clients who did all sorts of decision-making, peak performance coaching, and then worked with me. And then when they decided that they wanted to add coaching to their careers later in their lives, have both coached for us for a while.
I have like 9 more questions. I'm going to ask one of them because we are going to run out of time. But the question is about behavioral finance, like Kahneman, Tversky, traditional behavioral finance. And, part of what Neil and I and our other partner Joy have observed is that, there's a ton of talk around behavioral finance and biases and heuristics, but very little sort of serious thought and adoption, folding it into practice management. It's one of the reasons Shaping Wealth exists, right? I guess, do you share, and you're not in the advice world, but you're in the markets. When you think about sort of do you agree that there's been sort of a low level of impact for behavioral finance? It seems like it's more edutainment and a curiosity than actually a practice. And if you agree with that, like, what have you observed about how some of this stuff lands?
I definitely agree. There's a large gap between the body of knowledge and the interest in the body of knowledge and doing anything with it. Making it actually practical. But like, take confirmation bias. Okay, so we shouldn't have confirmation bias, right? Why do we have it? Because we're afraid of admitting we're wrong. Because if we admit wrong, we're going to be embarrassed. So typically, behavioral finance doesn't get to that point. Kahneman's a cognitive behavioral guy. You think and you do. You don't analyze the emotion that causes you to do. So I think there's an aspect of it that needs added, frankly, that confirmation bias is really fear of future embarrassment. And you got to tolerate the embarrassment in order to be able to admit you're wrong earlier in the cycle. And if you can't do that, you literally can't see the data that's going to tell you you're wrong.
Yeah, our colleague Joy has the best line where she says that, the challenge with behavioral finance is that it pathologizes normal human behavior.
Yeah. Well, Kahneman at the end of Thinking Fast and Slow said there's nothing he can do about it. It's like on page 642 or something, because I was like, what? But I mean, it's the old model of the brain. It's cognition and behavior. And it's just not the way the human brain really works.
Neil, knowing Neil like I do, reading his body language, he's like, can we go another hour here? But we can't, because I know we all have a hard stop. Neil, you want to wrap up and take us home?
Yeah, I mean, I've had to pile 9 pages of questions, right? So I'm just going to put them next to me, and I'll email them to you, Denise. No, I couldn't agree with the way what you just said, actually, Denise. Is a great way to wrap it up. The fact is that we have this thing called behavioral finance, behavioral science, behavioral finance, right? A branch of, and the body of work is huge, but actually how we apply that is the impact hasn't really been made yet. And I think one of the problems we have, and I've been researching this thing for 20 years, is that we neglect to really understand what's going on in between our ears. You know, we really ignore the human brain in the equation of trying to apply behavioral finance. We haven't even mentioned the amygdala, which I'm really upset about.
I'm so disappointed.
It's the only reason I'm here.
It's Denise's least favorite brain part, if that's the right technical term. She told me beforehand, we can't go there. No amygdala, she says.
It is not the center of emotion.
It really isn't. But listening to you talk about confirmation bias and regret aversion, almost, you know, for me, I instantly go to, but actually you need to understand the brain chemistry that's going on at the same time. Because we can talk about these things, you know, confirmation bias, framing, anchoring, disposition effect, whatever. But actually, unless you understand how the brain is processing the data that's coming into its head, then, you know, great, you know these words and the names for things, but you don't really understand the human.
Well, it's an accurate description of how the average human being behaves, you know, or how, but we've got the wrong model of why people make the choices. We've really got the wrong model of thinking. So people aren't taught to think like with all the faculties that are actually influencing their thinking, so they don't know. So then those mistakes are going to happen.
Exactly right. I could talk to you for hours on end, but it's 1 minute to the top of the hour. Brian will metaphorically kick me under the table if I don't stop talking. So I'm just going to stop talking and hand it back to Brian to actually wrap up.
Denise Shull, thank you so much. This was as stimulating and provocative as I hoped it would be. For everybody who joined us today, thank you. This is this month's episode of Chopping Wealth, and we look forward to seeing you back here very soon. So thanks to everybody.
Thanks for having me.